Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome Kimberly Smith. She's a wound care nurse and healthcare executive. Today's Kevin MD article is Why Clinicians Must Lead Healthcare Tech Innovation. Kimberly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, let's start by briefly sharing your story, then we'll jump right into your Kevin MD article.
Okay, great. Yeah, so my background is primarily in home health care. I spent most of that time as a wound and ostomy nurse, which is what I like to really call the Navy SEALs of nursing, right? It's extremely hands-on, unpredictable, and definitely not for the faint of heart. So I started there. I really got my hands in patient care and learning all about them, and really found out that, if we didn't have something, if it didn't exist, that we created it. So lots of opportunity where we could be innovative and really make some changes in how we deliver patient care.
Now, tell me how you made that transition from being on the ground, so to speak, into an executive role.
Yeah, so it was a long journey, I feel like. So, yeah, so I started seeing patients and then quickly moved into a corporate role so I could make a larger impact. I ran a multi-state program where we had multiple wound care nurses in the field doing wound care. And then I was able to really start using some virtual technology at that point to do online consultation, which was new. Back in 2013, that wasn't really heard of. So I think that I had the unique opportunity to build that program kind of from the roots up. And then from there, I headed into med device, where I learned a lot about development of products and client education and really teaching patients and clinicians on how to use those devices. And then I moved into net health, into my current role, which is a clinical executive, where I really do help shape the products and make sure that that clinical voice is interpreted to our engineering team. So I think that's a really neat journey and really has led me to lots of opportunities.
All right, let's talk about your Kevin MD article. Why Clinicians Must Lead Healthcare Tech Innovation. For those who didn't get a chance to read your article, tell us what it's about.
Yeah, so this article really centers on one idea that clinicians should be at the forefront of innovation, right? So we shouldn't be developing technology just for innovation's
Mhm.
sake. It really should fit some of the problems and answer some of the challenges that we have in the field. So I think that this came from sitting in meetings where a lot of new technology was introduced to us by leadership. These tools were designed with the best of intentions. They look great on the surface, but when you actually use them in the field, it just created more work.
Mhm.
And so I think that what I wanted to really say with this article is that, we have these tools and they're being built for clinicians, but not with them. And we're really missing the mark, right? That's a recipe for disaster if you don't have a clinical voice when you're building clinician tools. So I wanted to challenge that mindset and really remind people that clinicians don't just use these tools, we live with them patient by patient, hour by hour. We're the ones who are actually using them. So imagine this. You're in a patient's home, you need to take a photo of a wound for documentation. In a hospital setting, that's easy, right? You just snap the photo. But in the home, there's no lighting, no patient, no one to help you turn the patient. There's a cat maybe crawling across the bed. And now your photography app requires Wi Fi that you don't have. It's so incredibly frustrating. So, this article, my purpose was really to show how the clinician's voice is essential in shaping the future of health technology, that if when we're not involved early, that these tools really drift away from reality and they're just not useful. So often developers can miss things like interoperability, regulatory compliance, or even the basic connectivity issues that we face in the field. And I think that it's so important that we keep the patients in mind, that we keep the clinicians in mind, and really drive our innovation, having their voice first and foremost.
You mentioned that sometimes if these tech tools aren't clinician led, it could actually lead to more work
Yeah.
for the clinicians, right? So, what would be some examples of technology like that actually creates more work because they don't have a clinician spearheading the development?
Sure. So let's take an EMR, for example. An EMR is developed, and we always have these regulatory issues, the compliance issues, and they're ever changing, right? And the regulatory and compliance issues are important. I'm not saying that they are certainly important because that really helps us deliver the ideal patient care and get the ideal patient outcomes. But we have to know how to capture the good work that we're doing out there. And sometimes that's a big challenge. So
Mhm.
EMRs are developed to hopefully capture all of those things together. but they have to be streamlined. They have to be efficient. Don't hand me a tool and tell me that it's going to save time and actually it's more work. Okay. It has to be less work. So, but if you give me that tool and it does save time and it gives me time back with my patients, that's incredibly important to clinicians.
Now, when you say that you have input in spearheading the device that your company makes, so tell us what goes on behind the scenes. How do the engineers incorporate your feedback to them?
Oh gosh, there's so many things. First and foremost, I think the most important thing is being face to face with clinicians. Is to really being out in the field and using some time to spend with them to see how it's being utilized, to see the things that, in a test environment that we're not seeing, that we don't see the hiccups, we don't see this alert coming. And so spending that time with clinicians and really understanding what this technology means to them day to day is the first and foremost. We also have advisory panels where we have clinicians who come in, they sit with us, they tell us about their real world uses, they make suggestions, and just being open to that feedback, welcoming that feedback, and soliciting that feedback from our clinicians is very, very important. We also have conferences. We bring in these clinicians into one space to collaborate and network. And I think that is huge too, because when you're really talking with other clinicians in the same environment, you are seeing them face to face, and that really sparks ideas. So, gathering all those ideas in one place and then being able to translate that into our product. What makes sense for our product? Does it make sense for one person or one clinician, or does it make sense for the whole? So, we have to kind of weed through some of that as well. But understanding that clinical voice and understanding what it's like day to day is the most important part in really developing technology with the clinician in mind.
Now, would you say that that scenario is the norm among health IT companies? Speaking in general, do the majority of them incorporate clinician input when developing their products?
I would like to say yes, and that should be the norm. Is it? I think it depends on the size of the company, how long the company has been around, who's leading. So I definitely think there's a lot of opportunity for growth in that area. And that's kind of what is sparking this article too, is, not only from the clinician side, hey, you need to stand up and have a voice, also to the companies who develop these products. It's like, don't forget that this really is the most important thing is to have that clinician voice, put these processes in place, solicit that feedback so that you're really developing what is needed out there and not just for development's sake.
You write in your article that health systems evaluate tech based on cost and ROI, return on investment. How can clinical leaders make a stronger case that ease of use for the care team should factor into that return on investment?
What I see is one gap that happens over and over, and it's not just in health tech, right? It's in med device or any product that the hospital system brings on. Is a lot of times the process is that folks who are not actually seeing the patient at the bedside are making these decisions, and some of that is really logistical. And so I know it makes sense on some ends, but you really have to start from the ground up,
Mhm.
right? Have your clinicians who are seeing these patients day in and day out have their voice heard and really start from the problem and work towards a solution. Don't develop or bring on new technology just because you think that it'll fix some problems. Make sure that these are the problems that are really causing that gap and that the solution is going to answer those challenges.
So let me ask from the perspective of the clinician, a nurse or a doctor. So let's say if they had an idea for a new tech tool, but didn't have any instruction in terms of how to navigate that business side of innovation, what kind of advice do you have for that clinician?
I would say that you really have to find the right person within that technology company to give you that instruction. Sometimes it's always not always clear on who you need to speak to, right? And sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. You want to make sure that you're getting the most use out of the technology that you have. And I think that's true of all of us, right? I have an iPhone, but do I know everything that iPhone can do? Absolutely not. But is it up to me to research that and find that information? It is. So my biggest point of advice would be never stop learning, dive deeper, figure out what the solution can do and how it really can help you. You may spend some time on the front end learning that, but it's going to save a lot of time on the back end using that solution to the best of its ability.
In your article, you noted that rural hospitals or in rural areas in general, things like internet service that we take for
Mhm.
granted, sometimes it's a major barrier for something as basic as the electronic medical records.
Yeah.
Now, talk to us about how that illustrates some of the blind spots of tech innovation and how important a diverse set of feedback, clinical feedback, is when developing products.
Yeah, so you bring up a great point. Not only do we need to bring clinicians in, we need to bring clinicians in from all aspects, from all sides. So if we're really just focusing on those large hospital systems, so the ones that you hear all the time, those folks, they may be in cities, they may be in areas that have great connectivity. Well, what about those folks who are seeing patients in rural South Carolina, like where I live, right? That's huge. If you have to have connectivity, and we think in 2025 that everywhere should have Wi Fi or cellular connectivity, but the reality is that they just don't. So if your solution relies on that connectivity to function, it's not going to work for all of your clients. And that's going to be really frustrating. Not only is it going to be frustrating, it's going to slow down patient progress. It's going to affect our patient outcomes because the clinicians that are seeing these patients don't have the tools that they need and the information at their fingertips to do the best work for your patient.
Now, you are in that intersection between healthcare and innovative technologies. So many products are happening so fast, especially in the field of artificial intelligence. I'm interested in hearing your perspective in the next coming months. What do we have to look forward to? What kind of clinical problems do you think are ripe to be solved by technology in the coming months?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I'm really focused on is how data and AI can support better decision making, right? So not take away that clinical judgment, but extend it. And wound care technology, they can do things already that I think are really amazing that used to take three people to do, right? So now we have AI powered imaging. We have flags for those patients who are at risk for deterioration in wounds. We can predict when a patient is going to develop a pressure injury. Those are huge and they're definitely powerful, especially when you think about the shortage of wound care specialists. We're being asked to cover more patients with fewer hands. And when technology is used right, it helps clinicians really work to the top of their license. So I think the most exciting thing for me is to use those data analytics, to use that AI so that we can get better care to a bigger patient population. Because the reality is that our patients and our patient population is just getting bigger.
Mhm.
There's more and more patients with less and less resources. So how do we change from the current care model? Do we look at telehealth? Do we look at asynchronous visits so where we can really use our specialty license or our certifications to really make a bigger impact on our patients?
We're talking to Kimberly Smith. She's a wound care nurse and healthcare executive. Today's Kevin MD article is Why Clinicians Must Lead Healthcare Tech Innovation. Kimberly, let's end with some take home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Sure. So, what we talked about, what excites me right now is really the convergence of our clinical urgency and then our technological possibility. So, our patients don't wait, and neither can our solutions. So, my advice to clinicians is really step up, have your voice heard, identify those problems that we need to fix, identify those gaps that are really affecting our patient outcomes and have your voice. And then my advice to healthcare administrators and to our technology companies is really listen to those clinicians, seek them first when you're developing, when you're being innovative, see what's out there, what needs to happen, and really use this technology in a way that improves lives for our patients.
Kimberly, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight, and thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.